It came without warning, the kind of headline that shatters the hum of an ordinary morning and leaves a nation gasping for air. Charlie Kirk, shot dead at university event. The words hit like a thunderclap, flashing across television screens, vibrating through news alerts, echoing across social media feeds. For a split second, no one knew if it was real or some cruel fabrication, but as confirmation poured in, disbelief hardened into a chilling truth. The firebrand activist was gone, taken by a single bullet in front of a stunned crowd. The scene spread like wildfire. Students who had come for debate and dialogue were now witnesses to chaos, their shaky phone recordings replayed endlessly on every platform. The sound of panic, the screams, the stampede. America saw it all in real time. Clips looped on the hour, each replay twisting the knife deeper. Anchors, their voices trembling, struggled to frame the enormity of it. Commentators spoke of history, of violence, of freedom under siege. Everyone searched for meaning, yet the answers dissolved in the fog of shock. Supporters were shattered, some crying openly on live streams, their comments drenched in disbelief. Critics were stunned into silence, uneasy in the face of such a brutal ending. Even those who clashed most bitterly with him couldn't look away from the images, the blood-stained podium, the questions without answers. And in that storm of voices, conspiracy theories bloomed. Was it random? Was it political? Was this the result of an ideology too sharp, too divisive to survive? Theories multiplied as fast as the headlines, each one darker than the last. But amid the chaos, two figures loomed larger than the tragedy itself. One held his tongue, his silence cutting sharper than words, sparking whispers of indifference and calculation. The other, patient and measured, waited for the right moment to speak. AAV, voice that promised clarity, dignity, and a truth America wasn't ready to hear. Because this was never just a death. It was the beginning of a reckoning. And as the world searched for answers, the silence from one man and the voice of another would define the story. The shock of Charlie Kirk's death did not stay confined to the campus where it unfolded. Within hours, the tragedy had spread beyond the borders of one university, gripping the nation with a suffocating intensity. This wasn't just another act of violence. It was a moment that struck at the very veins of America's political and cultural identity. Because Charlie Kirk was not an ordinary activist, nor a minor figure whose name would fade into the background of news cycles. He was a lightning rod, a voice that divided as much as it rallied, a presence that demanded a reaction whether you loved him or despised him. For years, Kirk had stood as one of the loudest champions of conservative youth movements. He filled arenas, flooded podcasts, and staked his claim in the daily battles of ideology. His words, sharp and unfiltered, inspired a generation that saw him as the unapologetic defender of their beliefs. And yet those same words made him a figure of outrage for millions of others who viewed him as a symbol of arrogance, of a politics that thrived on provocation rather than unity. His name was a headline long before his death. Now it had become a headline no one could ignore. Politically, his absence left a vacuum, a hole in the conservative landscape that no one seemed ready to fill. The movements he nurtured, the young voices he trained to fight the culture wars, suddenly found themselves leaderless. And in moments like these, history teaches that power never stays unclaimed. Rival factions circled, opportunists sharpened their knives. The question of who inherits Kirk's influence became as pressing as the question of why was he killed. Socially, the reaction was even more volatile. To his supporters, his death was martyrdom, a violent silencing of a voice that spoke truth to their America. To his critics, the tragedy was layered with uncomfortable questions about how words inflame, how rhetoric can draw targets onto one's back. And to the millions watching from the sidelines, It was something more profound, a reminder of how fragile the nation's sense of security, dialogue, and civility had become. If a man could be gunned down on a stage in front of students, what did that say about the state of the country itself? Cable networks devoted round-the-clock coverage, each network shading the story through its lens. Hashtags surged and splintered. Memorials bloomed on campus steps, while heated arguments lit up town halls and living rooms. America wasn't just mourning or shocked. America was fracturing. The shooting had opened not only wounds of violence, but also deeper cracks in the nation's political soul. And as millions searched for answers, one truth became undeniable. This wasn't about one man anymore. This was about the balance of America's future. Would the country rally to heal, or would it unravel further under the weight of suspicion and division? People hoped for unity, for voices of leadership to calm the storm. But unity was not what they would get, because just when the nation braced for togetherness, the stage was set for something far darker. A collision of silence and speech, of arrogance and dignity, of two men whose choices would shape the legacy of this tragedy forever. From the very beginning of Charlie Kirk's rise, one name was always tied to his journey: Donald Trump. Kirk wasn't just another young conservative activist. He was, for years, the energetic echo of Trump's message. He built organizations that mobilized students, campuses, and even churches around Trump's ideology. He defended him relentlessly on television, at rallies, and in countless interviews, portraying Trump not as a flawed politician, but as a symbol of resistance against what they both framed as the radical left. Their bond was not personal alone. It was ideological, a fusion of power and platform. For Trump, Kirk was more than an ally. He was an amplifier. That's why, when news broke of Kirk's shocking death, the world turned toward Trump. It was natural to expect that he would speak first, loudly, and with fire. After all, Kirk wasn't just an activist. He was someone who had stood shoulder to shoulder with Trump on the biggest stages of American politics. Crowds remembered them appearing together at rallies, smiling as if they were generals leading an army of believers. For many conservatives, Kirk's words were a youthful extension of Trump's own battle cries. But when the moment came, Trump said nothing. At first it was disbelief. Surely his statement was coming. Surely the man who never missed an opportunity to command headlines wouldn't let this silence linger. Supporters waited, reporters asked, commentators speculated. Yet the silence stretched on, hours, then days. And in that silence, questions began to take root. Why would Trump hold his tongue? To some, the silence looked like arrogance, a belief that he didn't owe anyone an explanation, that the loyalty Kirk had shown was one-sided and disposable. To others, it looked like indifference. Trump had always valued people for their usefulness, and now, with Kirk gone, there was nothing left to gain. Still, another interpretation stung more deeply. Political calculation. Perhaps Trump had decided that speaking on Kirk's death wouldn't serve him, wouldn't win votes, wouldn't elevate his campaign. If so, then his silence was cold strategy, not human grief. The longer Trump remained quiet, the louder the silence became. Cable networks replayed old clips of Kirk praising Trump, calling him the greatest president of his lifetime. They showed photographs of the two men laughing together. That void became an antagonist in itself, a dark shadow over the conservative movement. For those who had followed Kirk, it felt like betrayal. Was loyalty in politics nothing but a temporary transaction? Did power mean so much that even death could be ignored if it wasn't politically useful? The silence reshaped the narrative. Kirk's death was no longer just a tragedy. It became a mirror reflecting Trump's character, or lack thereof. And while conservatives wrestled with disappointment, critics of Trump seized the moment, portraying him as cold, self-absorbed, incapable of compassion, even toward those who had given him unwavering devotion. Still, Trump's silence created something else. An opening. A vacuum. A gap where leadership, empathy, and moral authority were expected but absent. And in politics, a vacuum never lasts long. Someone always steps in to claim the ground left empty. And so, while Trump's silence grew heavier by the day, another voice prepared to rise. A voice that would not remain quiet. A voice that would shift the spotlight, not just onto Kirk's death, but onto the deeper question of what America truly stood for. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would shake the nation. But as Trump stayed silent, another figure prepared to step into the light. Barack Obama has always carried himself with a rare calm, a dignity that seemed to steady even the most turbulent of moments. To his supporters, he was not just a politician. He was a reminder that leadership could still be rooted in hope, in unity, in the belief that words could heal wounds rather than deepen them. His legacy, however debated in policy, was never in doubt when it came to presence. He embodied composure in chaos, restraint in anger, and grace when division threatened to tear the nation apart. This legacy mattered now, in a moment when America was shaken not just by the death of Charlie Kirk, but by the silence of Donald Trump. Into that silence, the country looked elsewhere for a voice that could rise above the noise of bitterness, partisanship, and suspicion. Few voices still carried that kind of moral weight, but Obama's was one of them. To understand why his response mattered, one has to revisit the battles that defined him. From the earliest days of his presidency, Obama confronted a country raw with polarization. He faced down a tide of voices who painted him as illegitimate, un-American, an outsider who had no place in the White House. Hate was hurled at him not only for his politics, but for his identity. And yet instead of responding with rage, he countered with something else: composure. He did not feed the flames. He steadied himself, and by doing so, steadied others. There were moments when the nation fractured, when the weight of violence and bigotry pressed down like a suffocating fog. The Charleston church shooting, where worshipers were murdered in their place of prayer. The Ferguson unrest, where racial wounds bled openly on America's streets. Each time, Obama stepped forward not as a perfect man, but as a deliberate one. He spoke of unity when others sought division. He mourned with communities when they felt forgotten. He framed tragedy not as an opportunity for power, but as a reminder of shared humanity. It was this history that made his voice so singular in Kirk's aftermath. Obama, of all people, knew what it meant to stand against division, to refuse the easy path of exploiting fear. And while Kirk had often positioned himself in direct opposition to everything Obama represented, the moment transcended rivalry. Death has a way of stripping politics bare, revealing what is human beneath what is ideological. Obama understood this, perhaps better than anyone alive. And so, as America reeled, his silence was not the silence of absence. It was the silence of waiting. People wondered, would he speak? Should he speak? Some critics argued that Obama had no place in this moment, that he should leave it to others. But for many, his words were exactly what was missing. They were the balance against Trump's void, the counterweight to a silence that felt hollow and selfish. When Obama finally emerged, he did not come forward as a partisan warrior. He came forward as a voice of moral authority. His presence reminded people of a time when leaders spoke to the soul of the nation, not just to their supporters. Even those who had disagreed with him politically could not deny that he spoke with measured conviction, with a cadence that sounded less like politics and more like truth. This was the empathy America was starving for. Kirk's death had already divided people. Some saw him as a martyr, others as a polarizer who reaped what he sowed. The danger was that this division would spiral, turning grief into another battlefront in America's endless culture wars. But Obama's legacy, his very identity, was about resisting that spiral. He had spent years reminding the country that dignity was not weakness, that compassion was not naivety, That unity was not the absence of conflict, but the refusal to let conflict destroy the possibility of common ground. And so, when his moment finally arrived, people leaned in. They knew what his voice had meant in the past. They remembered the power of his words in the aftermath of crisis, the way he had once led a nation through storms of fear and anger. In their minds, they could already hear the calm rhythm, the way he would look not just at one side, but at all sides, speaking to the better angels that so often seem to retreat in times of chaos. The anticipation built. News outlets speculated. Commentators dissected what he might say, how he might frame Kirk's death, not just as a personal tragedy, but as a mirror reflecting America's broader struggle with division and hate. Because this was never about one man. Not really. This was about the soul of a nation, the crossroads between bitterness and healing, silence and truth. And in that crossroads, Obama's voice mattered because it represented something rare. The possibility that words, carefully spoken, could still pierce through anger, fear, and cynicism. In that moment, the nation held its breath. And when Obama finally spoke, his words pierced through the noise like a thunderclap. The divide sharpened the moment Obama's voice hit the airwaves. His speech spread like wildfire. Broadcast live, clipped into highlights, quoted and shared across every platform. On Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, the words dignity and unity trended alongside hashtags demanding justice, healing, and accountability. For millions, it felt like someone had finally broken through the fog. Obama's presence reminded people of what leadership could sound like: steady, moral, human. And then there was the silence. Trump's silence. Cable news filled the gap with speculation. Some anchors asked bluntly why the former president hadn't spoken. Others tried to defend him, claiming he was waiting for the facts or grieving privately. But the absence of words itself became a story, an empty space that grew louder with every passing hour. For his critics, the silence reeked of arrogance, proof that he valued politics over decency. For his supporters, it was strategy, a refusal to play into the narrative. But either way, the silence was deafening. The clash was irresistible to the media. Side-by-side split screens filled the nation's televisions. Obama at a podium, speaking calmly about loss and unity, while next to him, an empty frame symbolized Trump's refuge. Sal to appear. Newspapers ran headlines like, "Two Americas, one speaks, one refuses." The symbolism was too stark to ignore. On social media, the firestorm ignited. Hashtags like #Obama speaks for us trended alongside "Where is Trump?" Meme accounts flooded timelines with images of an empty chair labeled leadership. Activists called for rallies to honor Kirk's death and demand action against political violence, while conservative influencers accused Obama of exploiting tragedy for moral points. The debate spiraled, pulling ordinary people into its orbit. In cities across America, protests broke out. Some were vigils, peaceful gatherings where candles were lit, and Obama's words were replayed through portable speakers. Others turned combative. Chants of "silence is complicity" clashed with shouts of "let him grieve his way." The streets became a mirror of the digital battlefield, each side projecting their frustrations, each convinced they were defending the soul of the country. Politicians, too, were forced to choose. Democrats praised Obama's intervention, painting him as the moral compass America needed in its darkest hour. Republicans scrambled. Some echoed Trump's silence, refusing to comment. Others distanced themselves, offering statements of sympathy for Kirk's family, but pointedly avoiding criticism or praise of Obama. The fractures inside the GOP grew visible, each crack widening under the heat of scrutiny. Talk shows turned the moment into nightly drama. Commentators replayed Obama's words again and again, dissecting their cadence, their meaning, their power. Others scolded the media for what they saw as bias, arguing that silence could be as meaningful as speech. The debate grew less about Kirk himself and more about what America wanted from its leaders: empathy or defiance, words or strategy, presence or absence. For progressives, the choice felt clear. Obama's voice resonated because it represented a kind of leadership they craved: compassionate, unifying, forward-looking. For conservatives, the silence became a shield, a way of resisting what they saw as another attempt to shame and corner them. The death of one man had become a battle line, stretching across neighborhoods, communities, and families. But beneath the noise, one truth became undeniable. This was no longer about Charlie Kirk alone. His death was the spark, but the fire now consumed questions far larger than him, questions about America's identity, its leaders, and its future. Still, the story had not reached its peak. Because while the world debated the contrast between Trump's silence and Obama's voice, something darker stirred. Rumors began to surface. Whispers spread through back channels, online forums, and partisan outlets. Whispers of a counterstrike, something planned, something looming, something no one on either side expected. But no one expected the counterstrike that followed. The room was electric before he even stepped onto the stage. Thousands had gathered, not just out of grief, but out of hunger, for guidance, for clarity, for something steady in the chaos. The cameras were ready, microphones angled, every eye fixed on the curtains. Then, with the calm stride that had once carried him through history's highest office, he appeared. The applause thundered instantly, rolling through the hall like a wave breaking against stone. He didn't rush to the podium. He paused, soaking in the sound not for ego but for connection. He let the room feel the gravity of silence before his first word, and when he spoke, his voice carried not like a politician, but like a father, a teacher, a witness. "I did not come here tonight to speak about politics," he began, steady and deliberate. "I came here to speak about decency, about the value of a human life, about what it means to be American when tested by tragedy." The hall quieted, the applause dying into stillness, so every syllable. Lee seemed to hang in the air, precise, intentional. His cadence was measured, slower than the frantic pace of news cycles, slower than the feverish debates online. He refused to match the chaos. The audience erupted into applause. Some stood, tears welling in their eyes. The cameras panned to young people clasping each other's hands, nodding through the weight of his words. But he didn't stop there. His tone shifted, still calm, but edged with steel. "We cannot allow silence to become our response. We cannot look away and hope the storm passes. Leadership means speaking when it is hardest, standing when it is loneliest, and holding truth when it is most fragile." The room stirred, sensing where he was headed. Without naming Trump, he painted the silhouette of a man who had chosen absence over courage, silence over empathy. The contrast was unmistakable. "History," he continued, "will not remember the tweets you did not send. It will not remember the rallies you did not hold. But it will remember whether you stood with your fellow Americans when they wept. It will remember whether your silence deepened wounds or whether your words helped to heal them." The applause thundered again, longer, louder, sharper. It wasn't just agreement. It was release. A cathartic outpouring of frustration turned into affirmation. People leapt to their feet, chanting his name, clapping until their palms stung. He raised his hand, signaling them to settle. He didn't want noise to drown the message. And when the hall fell silent again, he leaned forward, lowering his voice, forcing every ear to strain closer. "This moment is bigger than one man's death," he said softly. "It is about who we are, who we choose to be. Do we allow division to dictate our future? Do we let arrogance masquerade as strength? Or do we stand together, black, white, immigrant, native-born, and say that the value of a human life is not negotiable. The words landed like hammer blows wrapped in velvet, calm but devastating, dignified but unrelenting. Trump's silence, broadcast across split screens and headlines, Ines looked suddenly hollow, even petty when measured against this towering presence. As the speech continued, he wove stories of immigrants who built their futures from nothing. Veterans who sacrificed quietly, teachers who held classrooms together with love and patience. Each story became a mirror, reflecting a vision of America grounded in dignity and service rather than arrogance and division. He paused often, letting the silence linger like punctuation, giving weight to every phrase. The audience leaned forward, hanging on those pauses as much as on the words themselves. Then he'd strike again, sharp, undeniable. "Strength is not in the volume of your voice," he declared. "Strength is in the truth you dare to tell when it costs you something." By now, the hall was on its feet more than in their seats. Standing ovations came in waves, not just at the crescendos, but at the quiet truths, the lines that felt like medicine after years of poison. And yet, the speech was not vengeful. He didn't gloat, didn't sneer. He didn't descend into the mud. Instead, he elevated, transcended, turning the stage into a sanctuary of hope. In doing so, he diminished Trump without even naming him. The villain shrank in absence, while the hero grew taller in presence. Finally, he closed with words that would replay on loop for weeks to come. "America does not belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the people who, even in darkness, choose to light a candle rather than curse the night. Let us be those people, tonight and always." The hall exploded, cheering, stomping, tears, chants. Social media lit up instantly. Hashtags like #Light a Candle and Obama Thunderclap surged into trending. Even critics admitted the performance was surgical, a masterclass in moral authority. Commentators called it a mic drop moment, the kind of speech that doesn't just address a nation. It rinse itself on its conscience. As he left the stage, the applause followed him like a storm refusing to end. Cameras captured faces wet with tears, strangers embracing, a nation momentarily united in awe. And yet, beneath the inspiration, tension simmered. Because every word, every pause, every ovation had sent shockwaves across the political landscape, shockwaves that would not stop at admiration. They would ripple into confrontation. And the shockwaves of those words reached far beyond the stage. The speech ended, but the noise had only begun. Within minutes, clips of Obama's words flooded timelines. The line, "America does not belong to the loudest voice in the room," became an instant anthem, replayed in TikTok edits, quoted in Instagram reels, set against swelling music on Twitter feeds. The hashtag #LightACandle surged past 1 million posts in less than an hour, transforming a simple metaphor into a rallying cry. Meme culture pounced as well. One viral image showed Obama holding a candle while Trump sat in the dark with crossed arms, his expression blank. Another played on the empty chair symbolism, a spotlight shining on nothing, captioned, "Silence has never been leadership." Even late-night comedians joined in, weaving the speech into their monologues. Laughter blended with applause as the moment became both catharsis and cultural milestone. Celebrities began weighing in. Actors, singers, athletes. They posted clips of the speech, attaching their own words of admiration. A Grammy-winning artist tweeted, "That's the America I believe in." A famous NBA star posted a photo of himself holding a candle with the caption, "Hope, Hate." The message spread beyond politics, transcending into lifestyle, culture, and identity. It was no longer just a speech. It was a movement. Activists seized the momentum. Within 24 hours, vigils were organized in over 30 cities, promoted under #LightACandle. Delhi. Crowds gathered in public squares, holding candles and repeating Obama's words aloud. In one striking scene broadcast live, A group of immigrant families stood arm in arm, their faces illuminated in the soft glow, chanting, "Dignity, dignity, dignity." The imagery pierced through the chaos of the week, offering a counterweight to the violence that had triggered it all. Politicians couldn't ignore it either. Democrats hailed the speech as a turning point, a reminder of what moral leadership looked like. Some independents cautiously praised the message without endorsing the man, acknowledging its resonance across the divide. But inside the GOP, the reaction was chaos. Some Trump allies scrambled to defend him, insisting that measured silence was a sign of respect. Others broke ranks, whispering that his silence had become a liability too big to spin. The pressure mounted as cable networks ran split-screen coverage. Obama's words replayed endlessly on one side, Trump's empty silence lingering on the other. Panelists debated endlessly, but the visual contrast told the story better than any commentary could. For every defender arguing that Trump was simply exercising restraint, 10 voices shouted back that restraint in the face of tragedy was not strength, it was cowardice. Meanwhile, conservative talk shows raged, painting Obama's speech as manipulative theater. But their arguments seemed to wither against the sheer velocity of the movement outside their echo chambers. When a conservative senator appeared on live television to dismiss the speech as performance, the audience audibly booed, a rare breach of decorum that revealed how deeply the moment had shifted public mood.